The morning fog rolled through the streets of Buenos Aires like a living thing, wrapping around the Art Nouveau buildings and seeping into the cracks of the old cobblestones. Detective Julian Ferraro stood at the corner of Defensa and Chile in San Telmo, his weathered hands wrapped around a paper cup of cortado that had long gone cold. At 45, he'd seen enough of this city's darkness to know that some mornings carried a different weight than others. And this October morning in 2025 felt heavy with something he couldn't quite name. The call had come in at 4:47 a.m. about a situation that the uniformed officers couldn't explain, wouldn't explain, their voices crackling through the radio with an uncertainty that made even veteran cops sound like rookies. "You're going to want to see this yourself, Ferraro," Officer Mendez had said, and that was all. No details, no theories, just an address and that unsettling tone. Julian had been awake anyway. Another sleepless night haunted by the Almeida case from 3 years ago, the one where his certainty had cost a young woman her life. He'd been so sure, so absolutely convinced he knew who the killer was, but his tunnel vision had blinded him to the real threat. Now sleep came rarely, and when it did, it brought only accusations whispered by ghosts. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, and out stepped Camila Duarte, all 27 years of ambition wrapped in a practical grey suit that couldn't quite hide her eagerness. She'd been assigned as his partner just 2 weeks ago, fresh from her criminology doctorate, her thesis on pattern analysis in seemingly random crimes having caught the attention of the brass. Julian watched her approach, noting how she clutched her tablet like a shield, her dark eyes scanning the scene with the intensity of someone who still believed every mystery had a logical solution. "Detective Ferraro," she said, her voice steady despite the early hour. "The scene is 2 blocks from here. They've cordoned off the entire area, but the witnesses—" She paused, consulting her tablet. "The witnesses are being kept separate because their stories don't align. Not just different perspectives, but fundamentally incompatible accounts." Julian nodded, tossing his cold coffee into a trash bin. "Let me guess. Drugs? Mass hallucination?" Camilla shook her head, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw genuine confusion in her expression. "That's what I thought too, but the tox screens came back clean. All 6 witnesses, completely sober. They walked in silence through the awakening barrio, past the antique shops with their treasures locked behind iron gates, past the tango dancers' promotional posters peeling from humidity-stained walls. The crime scene tape came into view, yellow against the morning grey, surrounding a small plaza where a bronze statue of Carlos Gardel stood watching over a fountain that hadn't worked since the economic crisis of 2023. But it wasn't the statue or the fountain that drew their attention. It was the crowd of officers standing in a perfect circle, all facing outward, none of them looking at what was in the center. "What the hell?" Julian muttered, approaching Officer Mendez, whom he'd known for 15 years. The man's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. "Julian, I don't know how to write this up. I don't even know how to think about it." He gestured toward the center of the circle. "Just look." Julian pushed through the line of officers, Camilla close behind him, and stopped dead. In the middle of the plaza, exactly where the fountain's basin should have been filled with stagnant water and trash, was nothing. Not empty space, but nothing. A perfect sphere of absence that hurt to look at directly, about 3 meters in diameter, its edges sharp and defined, yet somehow impossible to focus on. "It appeared at 4:30 a.m., Mendez said, his voice barely above a whisper. 6 witnesses, all from different angles. The homeless man, Sergio, says he saw a door open in the air and someone walk through. The jogger, Maria Cristina, swears she saw a man dissolve like smoke. The baker from across the street says the fountain folded in on itself. The young couple claims they saw an old woman feeding pigeons 1 second, and then she was just gone, along with part of the fountain. And the 6th witness, the night security guard from the bank, insists nothing happened at all, that we're all seeing things. Camilla was already circling the anomaly, taking photos from every angle, her academic training overriding her shock. "The edges are perfectly uniform," she said, her voice taking on the detached tone of analysis. "Whatever caused this, it wasn't explosive or violent. It's almost surgical in its precision." She looked up at Julian. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" He wanted to say no, wanted to maintain his reputation as the skeptic, the one who found logical explanations for everything. But the truth was, this reminded him of something. A case from 8 years ago that had been classified and buried, one that still appeared in his nightmares alongside the Almeida failure. "We need to interview the witnesses separately," Julian said, forcing himself into professional mode, "and get this area completely sealed. No media. No curious onlookers. Whatever this is, we handle it quietly until we understand it." But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of impossibility pressing down on him. In 30 years of police work, he'd always found the thread that unraveled the mystery, always discovered the human hand behind the seemingly inexplicable. This felt different. This felt like the universe itself had made an error and left the evidence behind. As they began organizing the scene, Camilla pulled him aside. "Detective, I ran a preliminary check on similar incidents globally. There have been 12 comparable events in the last 6 months. Moscow, Mumbai, Lagos, Detroit. All with contradictory witness accounts. All with some form of spatial anomaly, all unsolved." She showed him her tablet, filled with reports marked classified from various international agencies. "How did you get access to these?" Julian asked. She gave him a small smile. "My thesis advisor has connections, but that's not the important part. Look at the dates." He studied the screen, and his blood chilled. The incidents weren't random. They followed a pattern, each one occurring exactly 23 days after the previous one. "If this pattern holds," Camilla said quietly, "the next one should be—" "In 23 days, Julian finished. "Here in Buenos Aires again, or somewhere else?" Before she could answer, a scream pierced the morning air. They ran toward the sound, finding Officer Mendez backing away from the anomaly, his face twisted in terror. "It moved!" he gasped. "The edge, it expanded, just for a second, but it moved, and I saw— God help me, I saw something inside it. Someone. They were trying to get out." Julian looked at the sphere of nothingness, unchanged to his eyes, then at Mendez, a man he'd trusted with his life more than once. "What did you see exactly?" Mendez shook his head, unable or unwilling to articulate it. "It was like looking at a photograph that kept changing every time I blinked. A woman, then a child, then an old man, all of them reaching out, all of them screaming without sound." The morning sun had finally burned through the fog, casting long shadows across the plaza. Where the anomaly's shadow should have been, there was instead a patch of ground that seemed too bright, as if lit from below. Camilla knelt beside it, her hand hovering just above the surface. "It's cold," she said with surprise. "The ground here is at least 10 degrees colder than the surrounding area." She pulled out a thermal scanner from her kit, one of the many devices she'd insisted on bringing despite Julian's initial skepticism about her gadgets. The reading made her face go pale. "Detective, this isn't just cold. According to this, the temperature at the exact center is approaching absolute zero. That's impossible without—" A hand grabbed her shoulder, pulling her back. It was Julian, his instincts screaming danger. "Don't touch it. Don't get close to it. Whatever this is, we're not equipped to handle it." He turned to Mendez. "Evacuate everyone from a 2-block radius. Call in the hazmat team, the bomb squad, everyone, and get the witnesses to the station. We need their statements before their memories start conflicting even more." Udi died as the plaza erupted into controlled chaos. Julian stood still, staring at the impossible absence before him. Somewhere in his gut, he knew this was just the beginning, that Buenos Aires had become ground zero for something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about reality. The interrogation room at the Villa Crespo police station had witnessed countless confessions over its 50-year history, its pale green walls absorbing lies and truths in equal measure. But as Julian sat across from Sergio, the homeless man who'd been first to witness the anomaly, he realized he was dealing with something entirely different. Sergio's hands trembled not from withdrawal or fear, but from something deeper, a fundamental shaking of his understanding of the world. His eyes, usually sharp despite his circumstances, kept focusing and unfocusing as if trying to reconcile what he'd seen with what his mind could accept. "Tell me again about the door," Julian said gently, sliding a cup of coffee across the scarred metal table. In the observation room, Camilla watched through the one-way mirror, her tablet recording every micro-expression, every pause and inflection. She'd already interviewed Maria Cristina the jogger, whose story grew more elaborate with each telling, as if her mind was filling in gaps with invented details to make sense of the senseless. Sergio wrapped his weathered fingers around the cup, the warmth seeming to ground him. It wasn't like a normal door, you understand. It was like someone had cut a rectangle out of the air itself, clean edges like with a razor, and through it, I could see somewhere else, not another country or anything like that, somewhere that shouldn't exist. The colors were wrong, Detective, colors that don't have names. He paused, struggling for words. And then he stepped through. A man in a suit, but old-fashioned like from the 1940s. He looked around like he was lost, then walked toward the fountain. When he reached it, he just stopped existing. Not disappeared, not vanished, stopped. Like a video that suddenly ends. Julian made notes, trying to maintain his professional demeanor despite the impossibility of what he was hearing. "Can you describe the man? Height, build, any distinguishing features?" Sergio closed his eyes, concentrating. Average height, thin grey hair, but his face kept changing. Not dramatically, just little things. His nose would be slightly longer one second, his eyes a different shade the next, like he couldn't decide who he was supposed to be. In the adjacent interrogation room, Camilla was sitting with the young couple, Federico and Luciana, both university students who'd been returning from a late night of studying. Their story was radically different, yet disturbingly consistent in its impossibility. The old woman was there, Luciana insisted, her boyfriend nodding in agreement. She was sitting on the edge of the fountain, throwing breadcrumbs to pigeons, at 4:30 in the morning, which we thought was weird. But Buenos Aires, you know? Weird is normal. Then she stood up, walked to the center of the fountain, which was dry, by the way, and started speaking in a language I've never heard. Not Spanish, not English, not anything recognizable. And as she spoke, she began to fade, but not like becoming transparent, more like she was being erased, pixel by pixel, if reality was a digital image. Federico added, "The fountain went with her. Not destroyed, not broken, just edited out, like someone had selected it in Photoshop and hit delete. What's left is that sphere of nothing. We can't see into it, but somehow I know it's not empty. It's full of something we don't have words for." His voice cracked on the last sentence, the bravado of youth crumbling before the incomprehensible. Camilla excused herself and met Julian in the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made both of them look older, more tired. "Their stories don't match," she said, "but they're all internally consistent. No one's changing their version, no signs of deception. They all believe absolutely in what they saw." Julian rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 45 years. "Mass delusion? Some kind of gas leak causing hallucinations?" Camilla shook her head. "I thought of that. Had the environmental team check. Air quality was normal. No unusual chemicals, no gas leaks, nothing in the water supply. And the physical evidence, that anomaly, it's real. Whatever it is." They were interrupted by Officer Rodriguez, younger than Camilla, and trying hard to hide his nervousness. "Detectives, we have a problem. The witness, the security guard from the bank, he's gone. His apartment's empty, looks like he left in a hurry. But that's not the strangest part." He handed them a tablet showing security footage from the bank. "This is from last night, time-stamped 4:30 a.m. The footage showed the plaza clearly, the fountain visible in the background. At exactly 4:30, nothing happened. The fountain remained intact. No anomaly appeared. No witnesses were visible despite their claims of being there." "That's impossible," Camilla breathed. "We have traffic cameras that caught the witnesses approaching the plaza. We have their phone GPS data placing them there." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I know. I checked 5 different cameras from different systems. 3 show the event happening, the anomaly appearing, witnesses reacting. 2 show nothing at all. Same timestamp, same angle, completely different realities." Julian felt the familiar weight of failure creeping up his spine. The same feeling he'd had during the Almeida case when he'd realized too late that he'd been looking at everything wrong. But this was different. This wasn't about missing clues or misinterpreting evidence. This was about evidence that contradicted itself at a fundamental level. They returned to the plaza as the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows that made the anomaly even more disturbing. The hazmat team had set up a perimeter, their instruments detecting radiation levels, electromagnetic fields, gravitational anomalies, all reading normal despite the impossible void in reality. Dr. Patricia Vega from the University of Buenos Aires Physics Department had been called in, and she stood at a safe distance, her face a mixture of excitement and terror. "It's a stable spatial discontinuity," she said when Julian and Camilla approached. "That shouldn't be possible outside of theoretical mathematics. It's as if someone punched a hole through 3-dimensional space. But the hole leads nowhere, or rather, it leads to a nowhere that exists." She showed them readings on her laptop. "The edge is absolutely sharp. We're talking Planck-length precision. No human technology could create this." "So what are we dealing with?" Julian asked, though he suspected no answer would be satisfying. Dr. Vega hesitated. "In my professional opinion, we're looking at evidence that our understanding of reality is fundamentally flawed. This shouldn't exist, but it does, which means either physics is wrong or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" Camilla prompted. "Or we're seeing an intrusion from somewhere else, somewhere that operates by different rules." As they stood contemplating this impossibility, Julian's phone rang. It was the station. "Detective, you need to see the news. Channel 13 right now." They rushed to a nearby cafe where a television was playing. The headline made Julian's blood run cold. "Similar anomaly appears in Recoleta Cemetery, 3 missing." The footage showed another sphere of nothingness, this one among the elaborate tombs of Argentina's most famous dead. But this time, there was something different. This time, there were words carved into the ground around it, in a script that looked almost familiar, but remained unreadable. "That's not 23 days, Camilla said quietly. "The pattern's accelerating." Julian was already moving toward the door, his mind racing. 2 anomalies in one city on the same day. 6 witnesses with impossible, contradictory stories, evidence that disagreed with itself, and now 3 missing people. He thought about the security guard who'd insisted nothing had happened, who'd fled in the night. Maybe he'd had the right idea. Maybe the only sane response to the impossible was to run. But Julian couldn't run. Not from this. The weight of the Almeida case, of his past failures, wouldn't let him. If Buenos Aires was becoming ground zero for something beyond understanding, then he'd face it. He had to. Because if he'd learned anything in 30 years of police work, it was that even the impossible left clues. You just had to learn how to see them. The Recoleta Cemetery at dusk was a city of the dead that rivaled any metropolis of the living. Mausoleums stood like miniature palaces, their marble facades telling stories of Argentina's elite across 2 centuries. Julian and Camilla made their way through the narrow passages between tombs, following Officer Rodriguez, who'd been first on scene. The anomaly had appeared near the Duarte family crypt, a grotesque irony that wasn't lost on Camilla. Evita's resting place just 50 meters away, as if even anomalies respected Argentine history. This sphere was smaller than the one in San Telmo, perhaps 2 meters in diameter, but it pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost organic. The words carved around it were clearer now, photographed from every angle by the forensics team. They resembled a mixture of ancient scripts. Some characters looked Sumerian, others vaguely Sanskrit, yet others completely alien. Dr. Vega had sent them to linguists worldwide, but no one could make sense of them. The 3 missing persons, a groundskeeper and an elderly couple who'd been placing flowers on a grave, had vanished differently this time. There were witnesses, but their accounts were more disturbing than contradictory. "They walked into it," said Marina Paz, the cemetery administrator, her voice hollow with shock. "All 3 of them, not at once but one after another, like they were being called. The groundskeeper Miguel, he'd been working here for 20 years, knew every corner of this place, but he walked straight into that thing like he was going home." She paused, pulling her cardigan tighter despite the warm evening. The worst part, just before he disappeared, he turned back and smiled. Not a normal smile, a smile like he finally understood something the rest of us couldn't see. Julian studied the security footage on Marina's computer, the cemetery's new digital system having captured everything in high definition. The timestamp read 2:17 p.m. Miguel approached the anomaly slowly, his body language changing from cautious to curious to something like recognition. Then the elderly couple, the Valdezes, arrived with their flowers. Without speaking to each other, without any apparent communication, they too approached the void. The footage showed them entering the sphere and simply ceasing to exist. No flash, no struggle, just absence. "I need everything you have on these 3 people," Julian told Marina. "Employment records for Miguel, any information on the Valdezes. When did they start coming here? Who were they visiting?" Marina nodded, her fingers already flying across her keyboard. "Miguel was unusual. Brilliant man, actually. Had a degree in archaeology, spoke 5 languages, could have done anything but chose to tend graves. Said the dead were better company than the living." She pulled up his file. "The Valdezes have been coming every Thursday for 3 years, visiting their son's grave. He died in the 2022 protests, shot by police during the food riots." Camilla, who'd been examining the inscriptions with UV light, suddenly called out, "Detective, you need to see this." Under the ultraviolet, more text became visible, not carved, but somehow embedded in the very air around the anomaly. It hurt to look at directly, the letters seeming to shift between dimensions. But one phrase repeated in what looked like Spanish, though written in that strange script. "The door opens both ways." Julian's phone buzzed with a text from the station. More anomalies were appearing across Buenos Aires, Belgrano, Flores, La Boca, each with witnesses reporting different impossibilities, each with inscriptions that defied translation, and now people were voluntarily entering them. Social media was exploding with theories ranging from alien invasion to government experiments to the rapture. The government had issued a statement urging calm while providing no explanations, and the military was quietly mobilizing. They returned to the station to find chaos. The main briefing room had been converted into a command center, with maps of Buenos Aires marked with red circles where anomalies had appeared. Federal agents had arrived, their black suits and earpieces making them stand out among the regular officers. Agent Director Raul Sanchez, a man Julian had crossed paths with during the classified case 8 years ago, stood at the center of it all, his silver hair and ramrod posture giving him an air of authority that silenced the room when he spoke. "Detectives Ferraro and Duarte," he said, his voice carrying a weight of knowledge he wasn't sharing. "You've been closest to this since it started. I need your assessment." Julian felt Camilla tense beside him. They'd discussed this possibility, that the government knew more than it was saying. "Our assessment," Julian said carefully, "is that we're dealing with something outside normal parameters. The witness accounts, the physical evidence, the voluntary disappearances, none of it fits any known pattern." Sanchez nodded slowly. "What if I told you this wasn't the first time, that Buenos Aires has seen this before?" The room went silent. Camilla stepped forward. When? Sanchez gestured to an aide who distributed classified folders. 1952, 1976, and 2001. Each time during periods of social crisis. Each time covered up, explained away as mass hysteria, gas leaks, terrorist attacks. But the reports, buried in archives most people don't know exist, tell the same story. Spatial anomalies, contradictory witnesses, voluntary disappearances. Julian opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly. Photos from 1952 showed similar spheres of nothingness, though captured in grainy black and white. Reports from 1976, during the Dirty War, describe people walking into anomalies and returning changed, speaking of other Buenos Aires, other Argentinas, where history had taken different paths. The 2001 incidents, during the economic collapse, were the most disturbing, entire families entering anomalies together, leaving behind notes saying they were going to the better place. Why wasn't this public knowledge? Camilla demanded. Sanchez's expression was grim. Because public knowledge would have caused panic, and because we never found answers, only questions. The anomalies eventually stopped each time. The missing either returned with no memory or never returned at all. We hoped it was over. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, they could see a crowd gathering, led by a man Julian recognized, Carlos Echeverria, the controversial physicist who'd been dismissed from the university for his theories about parallel realities. He was shouting through a megaphone, "They're not anomalies, they're doors to the Argentina that should have been. The government knows, they've always known." He's not entirely wrong, Sanchez admitted quietly. Some of the returns spoke of other versions of our country, ones where different choices were made, different paths taken. But the human mind isn't equipped to process that kind of information. Most who returned went insane within months. Suddenly, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. A new anomaly had appeared, but this time it was different. This time it was moving, slowly but deliberately, down Avenida Corrientes, leaving a trail of that impossible nothingness behind it. And walking beside it, clearly visible on the traffic cameras, were Miguel, the groundskeeper, and the Valdeses. But they weren't quite right. Their movements were too fluid, their faces shifting subtly with each frame of video, as if they were simultaneously themselves and not themselves. "Dear God," Camilla whispered. "They're coming back. But what are they bringing with them?" The moving anomaly had stopped at the intersection of Corrientes and Callao by the time Julian and Camilla arrived with a full tactical team. The sphere, now elongated like a corridor of nothingness, stretching back 3 blocks, pulsed with that organic rhythm they'd observed at Recoleta. The streets had been evacuated, but crowds pressed against the police barriers, phones raised, live-streaming the impossibility to the world. Miguel and the Valdeses stood perfectly still beside the anomaly, their faces serene but wrong in a way that made everyone who looked at them feel nauseated. "Don't approach them," Sanchez commanded through the radio. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." But Julian was already moving forward, his instincts overriding protocol. The Almeida case had taught him that sometimes waiting for understanding meant losing the chance to act. He stopped 3 meters from Miguel, close enough to see that the man's eyes weren't quite synchronized, one tracking a fraction of a second behind the other. "Miguel," Julian said calmly, "where did you go?" Miguel's head turned toward him with mechanical precision. When he spoke, his voice had harmonics that shouldn't exist in human speech. "We went through. We saw the other paths. The Argentina where Perón never returned. The one where the dirty war never happened. The one where the economic collapse led to revolution instead of resignation. All of them, Detective Ferraro. All of them at once." Camilla had circled around, her tablet recording everything. The electromagnetic readings near the returned people were off the charts, but more disturbing were the thermal readings. Their body temperatures were simultaneously normal and absolute zero, as if they existed in multiple states at once. "How is this possible?" she asked. her scientific training warring with the evidence before her. Mrs. Valdez turned to her, and Camilla gasped. The elderly woman's face was overlaid with images of herself at different ages, young, middle-aged, elderly, all superimposed like a multiple exposure photograph. Possibility is just perspective, child. Your Buenos Aires, our Buenos Aires, they're all equally real. The doors are opening because the barriers are weakening. Too much pain, too much division, too much longing for what might have been. The city itself is crying out for alternatives. The crowd beyond the barriers was growing agitated. Some were calling the returned people demons, others angels. A group of young people had started chanting, "Open the doors, show us the other way." The social fabric of the city, already strained by years of crisis, was tearing at the seams. Julian noticed something that chilled him more than any anomaly. In the windows of the buildings along Corrientes, faces were appearing. Hundreds of them pressed against the glass, but the buildings had been evacuated. These were faces from the other side, the other Buenos Aires that existed beyond the anomaly. Some looked exactly like people he knew, others were strangers, but all of them were watching, waiting. "They want to cross over," Miguel said, following Julian's gaze. "Just as many here want to cross to there. Every choice creates a branch, detective. Every crisis, a divergence. Buenos Aires has had so many crises, so many divergences. The weight of all those unlived possibilities is breaking through." Agent Sanchez had set up a field command post in a nearby cafe, its windows covered with aluminum foil to block the view of the anomaly. Inside, experts from various fields argued in heated whispers. Dr. Vega was at a laptop, running calculations that made her face increasingly pale. "If these anomalies continue to appear and expand at this rate," she announced, "within 72 hours, the entire city will be consumed. We'll have a complete spatial collapse." "What does that mean?" Sanchez demanded. Dr. Vega struggled for words. "It means Buenos Aires as we know it will cease to exist in any single state. It will become all its possibilities simultaneously. The human mind can't process that. Everyone in the city will either die or become like them." She gestured toward the window, "existing in multiple states at once." Camilla had been reviewing all the data they'd collected, looking for patterns everyone else had missed. Her strength had always been seeing connections others couldn't. "Detective Ferraro," she said suddenly, "the locations of the anomalies, they're not random. San Telmo, where the independence movement gathered. Recoleta, where the elite are buried. Corrientes, the cultural heart of the city. Each anomaly appears at a place of historical significance, places where crucial decisions were made that shaped Argentina." Julian understood immediately. The anomalies are appearing at divergence points, places where history could have gone differently. He thought about his own divergence point, the Almeida case, the moment when his certainty had led to tragedy. Everyone had such moments, choices that defined their path while closing off others. "There has to be a way to stop this," Sanchez said, but his usual authority was cracking. "In the previous incidents, the anomalies eventually stopped on their own. We just need to contain the situation until—" He was interrupted by a sound that made everyone freeze. It was singing, hundreds of voices in perfect harmony, but the song was impossible. Different melodies from different eras of Argentine history, all woven together into something that shouldn't work, but did. Outside, the crowd had broken through the barriers and was approaching the anomaly. But they weren't fleeing or attacking. They were walking toward it with the same serene purpose Miguel had shown at the cemetery. "They're all going to enter it," Camilla breathed in horror. "Hundreds of people are going to walk into those things." Julian was already running outside, shouting for people to stop, but his voice was lost in the singing. He watched helplessly as the first wave of people reached the anomaly and passed through it, their bodies flickering between states before disappearing. But then something unexpected happened. Some of them came back immediately, but changed. A young man emerged, speaking in the dialect of 1940s Buenos Aires. An old woman came out young, but with memories of a full life. A child walked out aged but with a child's wonder intact. They weren't destroyed or driven insane. They were transformed, carrying pieces of other possibilities with them. "It's not an invasion," Julian said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "It's not a disaster. It's a choice. The city itself is choosing to become something new, something that incorporates all its possibilities, instead of being trapped by one path." Camilla stood beside him, her tablet forgotten, watching as more people entered and emerged from the anomaly. But at what cost? What happens to identity, to continuity, to everything that makes us who we are? Julian thought about the weight he'd carried since the Almeida case, the path his life had taken because of one terrible mistake. What if he could incorporate the version of himself who had made the right choice? Would that make him whole or destroy him completely? The anomaly pulsed again, and this time words appeared in the air, readable in every language simultaneously. "The experiment ends at dawn. Choose your path, or have all paths chosen for you." Julian looked at his watch. 6 hours until sunrise. 6 hours for Buenos Aires to decide whether to remain singular or become plural, whether to accept one history or embrace all histories. As night fell over the city, the anomalies multiplied, appearing at every significant street corner, every historical monument, every place where the weight of choice had accumulated over centuries. The government had lost control, the experts had run out of theories, and the people were making their own decisions. Some barricaded themselves indoors, clinging to the familiar. Others walked into the anomalies, seeking the paths not taken. Julian and Camilla stood at the edge of the original anomaly in San Telmo as the first light of dawn approached. The city around them flickered between states, modern skyscrapers alternating with colonial buildings, protests from different eras occurring simultaneously on the same streets, multiple versions of the same people passing each other without acknowledgement. "Whatever happens when the sun rises," Julian said, "Buenos Aires will never be the same." Camilla took his hand, a gesture of human connection in the face of the impossible. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe a city that suffered so much deserves a chance to be all it could have been. As the sun broke the horizon, the anomalies blazed with impossible light. When it faded, Buenos Aires still stood, but changed. The anomalies were gone, but their legacy remained. Some people remembered multiple histories, others found themselves slightly different than they'd been. The city itself had incorporated its contradictions, becoming something new, neither the single path it had been forced to follow, nor a chaos of all possibilities, but something in between. Julian found himself carrying memories of both his failure in the Almeida case and his success in another version. The pain remained, but balanced by the knowledge that he had been capable of both outcomes. Camilla discovered she had knowledge from versions of herself who had taken different academic paths, making her not just a criminologist, but something more comprehensive. Buenos Aires had chosen its own form of resolution, becoming a city where the impossible had been accepted and integrated. The mysteries that had confused investigators were never fully solved in the traditional sense. Instead, they had transformed the investigators, the city, and reality itself into something that acknowledged that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, but lived with, incorporated, and ultimately transcended. The bizarre had become part of the fabric of existence, and Buenos Aires, that eternal city of crisis and renewal, had once again found a way to survive by transforming itself into something unprecedented.